Malcolm Pierce's throat burned as he coughed violently, the chemical taste overwhelming his senses. Passengers stared in horror as the flight attendant who'd served him water turned ghostly pale. His company badge glinted in the cabin light. Malcolm Pierce, CEO, Horizon Technologies. Before we dive deeper into this shocking incident that changed the airline industry forever, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever experienced or witnessed discrimination while traveling, this story will resonate with you. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that expose injustice and celebrate resilience in the face of adversity. Malcolm Pierce adjusted his Italian silk tie as he approached Gate C-42 at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from building Horizon Technologies from a small startup into a Fortune 500 cybersecurity powerhouse. His tailored charcoal suit, handcrafted leather briefcase, and platinum Apple Watch spoke of success. But experience had taught him these symbols often went unnoticed when people saw his skin. First-class boarding for Flight 1852 to San Francisco will begin momentarily, announced the gate agent, a young white woman with a practiced smile who glanced at Malcolm and then quickly away without the customary acknowledgement she offered. To the other executives gathering near the priority boarding lane, Malcolm took his position in the first-class line behind an older white gentleman who chatted amicably with the gate agent. When Malcolm stepped forward, her smile tightened. "Sir, we're boarding first class at this time," she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. Malcolm smiled politely. "Yes, I'm aware." He extended his boarding pass and ID. She examined his credentials with unusual scrutiny, glancing between his face and the documents twice before reluctantly scanning his boarding pass. "Have a nice flight," she said flatly, without the warmth she'd shown the previous passenger. As Malcolm walked down the jet bridge, he took a deep breath. 20 years in corporate America had prepared him for these moments. The subtle differences in treatment were familiar companions throughout his journey from MIT scholarship student to tech industry leader. Aboard the aircraft, flight attendant Vanessa Mitchell greeted passengers with professional efficiency. Blonde, attractive, and in her early 30s, she represented the airline's polished image perfectly. "Welcome aboard," she said brightly to the silver-haired executive in seat 2A. "May I take your jacket? Can I offer you a pre-departure beverage?" When Malcolm reached his assigned seat in 3C, Vanessa's smile flickered. "Your boarding pass, sir?" she asked, despite having not requested this verification from any previous first-class passenger. 3C, Malcolm replied, handing over his boarding pass. He'd learned long ago that expressing frustration only reinforced stereotypes about angry, black men. Instead, he maintained the composed demeanor that had helped him navigate countless boardrooms where he was often the only person of color. "This is first class," Vanessa said, a hint of challenge in her voice as she examined his boarding pass. "I'm aware," Malcolm replied evenly. "I fly this route monthly." Behind him, Kyle Reynolds, Horizon's CFO and Malcolm's longtime colleague, boarded the plane. White, affable and dressed in business casual attire that wouldn't have passed Malcolm's personal standards, Kyle received an immediate warm welcome. "Good morning, sir. 3D, right next to your colleague," Vanessa said with renewed cheerfulness. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" "Morning. Coffee would be great, thanks," Kyle replied, sliding into the seat beside Malcolm. "Hey, Malcolm. Ready for the conference? The San Francisco team is excited about your keynote." Malcolm nodded, watching as Sarah Chen, his Asian American VP of Operations, received similarly scrutinized treatment when she boarded for her seat in business class. She caught Malcolm's eye, a knowing look passing between them. "Coffee, please," Malcolm requested as Vanessa turned to leave. "I'll be back with beverages shortly," she responded without acknowledging him specifically. Kyle leaned over. "We've got the presentation finalized. The new security protocol demonstrations should make quite an impression on potential clients." As they discussed conference strategy, another flight attendant appeared. Brian Thompson, a senior crew member with a military bearing and tightly cropped hair, surveyed the first-class cabin with practiced efficiency. When his gaze landed on Malcolm, something hardened in his expression. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds," Brian said, nodding to Kyle while completely ignoring Malcolm. "Everything to your satisfaction today?" "Fine, thanks," Kyle replied, not noticing the slight. Malcolm had just removed his prescription medication for hypertension from his briefcase when Vanessa returned with Kyle's coffee. "Excuse me," Malcolm said before she could leave. "Could I get some water, please? I need to take medication before takeoff." "We're preparing for departure. I'll try to get to it," Vanessa replied, already turning away. 10 minutes passed. The remaining passengers boarded. Malcolm raised his hand as Vanessa passed again. "Sorry to bother you, but I really need that water for my medication," he said politely. "Right away, sir," Vanessa replied, but her attention was immediately diverted by Brian, who beckoned her to the galley. Malcolm couldn't hear their full conversation, but caught fragments as Brian spoke in hushed tones. "Making demands already. Always the same with them. Just wait until..." Vanessa nodded along, glancing back at Malcolm with newfound wariness. When she returned to the galley, she hurriedly grabbed a bottle from a service cart. The clear liquid looked like water, but the bottle lacked the usual branding. In her haste, and influenced by Brian's attitude, she failed to notice the small label indicating it was a bathroom cleaning solution, recently transferred to a water bottle for storage after the original container cracked. "Your water, sir," she said, placing it on Malcolm's tray table without a cup or ice, unlike the carefully prepared beverages served to other passengers. Malcolm thanked her anyway. As the plane prepared for takeoff, he unscrewed the cap, tipped the bottle toward his mouth and took a sip of what he believed was water, but was actually a powerful chemical cleaner. His life was about to change forever, and with it, an entire industry would be forced to confront its deeply rooted biases. The liquid hit Malcolm's tongue with an unexpected chemical bite. His throat constricted immediately as the burning sensation radiated through his mouth. Instinctively, he spat it out, but not before some of the solution trickled down his throat, leaving a trail of fire. "What the..." Malcolm gasped, his composure shattered by physical pain. His eyes watered as violent coughing overtook him. The burning intensified, spreading through his mouth and down his esophagus. Kyle turned sharply at Malcolm's distress. "Malcolm, what's wrong?" Malcolm couldn't speak. He gestured frantically at the bottle, still coughing as he struggled for air. The chemical taste coated his tongue, unmistakably not water. Passengers throughout first class turned to stare. An elderly woman gasped. A businessman across the aisle rose halfway from his seat in alarm. "He needs help!" Kyle shouted, pressing the call button repeatedly. "Something's wrong with his drink." Vanessa rushed over, her professional smile replaced by confusion. When Malcolm pointed at the bottle, she picked it up and examined it. The color drained from her face as she noticed the small label partially obscured by her own fingerprints. "Lavatory cleaning solution, toxic, do not consume." "Oh my God," she whispered, horror dawning in her eyes. Brian pushed past her, assessing the situation with a quick glance. "What seems to be the problem here?" His tone suggested inconvenience rather than concern. "You gave him cleaning solution," Kyle exclaimed, supporting Malcolm, who continued to cough violently. Brian took the bottle, examined it briefly, and his expression shifted subtly, not to concern, but calculation. "It appears there's been a mix-up," he said evenly. "These things happen during busy service." Malcolm finally caught enough breath to speak. "That's not water," he rasped, his voice raw. "It's burning my throat." From several rows back, a woman stood up. "I'm a doctor," she announced, moving purposefully toward them. "Let me through, please." Dr. Amara Johnson, a distinguished black neurologist returning from a medical conference, reached Malcolm's side. "Sir, what did you ingest?" she asked, her manner calm but authoritative. Malcolm pointed to the bottle Brian was holding. Dr. Johnson took it from Brian's reluctant grasp and read the label. "This is a serious situation," she declared, turning to Brian. "This man has ingested a caustic cleaning agent. We need to act immediately." "Do you have a medical kit on board?" Brian hesitated. "I think he just took a small sip. It's probably not." "Get the medical kit now." Dr. Johnson cut him off. her voice leaving no room for argument. "And inform the captain. This passenger needs medical attention as soon as possible." From across the aisle, Sarah Chen had risen from her business class seat, drawn by the commotion. She had her phone out and was recording discreetly. "The passenger is clearly overreacting," Brian muttered to Vanessa, not quite quietly enough. "These people always make a scene." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she captured his comment. Dr. Johnson overheard as well. "This is not an overreaction," she stated firmly. "Ingesting cleaning chemicals can cause serious esophageal burns and respiratory distress. This is a medical emergency." Malcolm maintained his composure despite the pain. Years of navigating corporate racism having taught him that showing too much emotion would only reinforce stereotypes. Even in this moment of physical agony, he was conscious of how he might be perceived. The incident brought back memories of countless professional slights throughout his career. The investor who had insisted on speaking only to Kyle during a funding pitch. The security guard who had followed him around his own company building before he was recognized. The executive who had assumed he was part of the catering staff at a tech gala. Each time, Malcolm had responded with dignity rather than the anger he rightfully felt. Vanessa returned with the medical kit, which Dr. Johnson opened efficiently. She provided Malcolm with water to rinse his mouth and examined his throat with a pen light. "The captain needs to know we require an emergency landing," Dr. Johnson told Brian firmly. "This man needs to get to a hospital." Brian's jaw tightened. "That's an extreme measure. We're still on the tarmac. We could return to the gate." "And? How long would deplaning take? Then waiting for an ambulance?" "No. This is time-sensitive," Dr. Johnson insisted. The confrontation was interrupted by the captain's voice over the intercom. "This is Captain Rivera speaking. We've been informed of a medical situation on board. We're returning to the gate where medical personnel will be waiting. Flight attendants, prepare for arrival." As the announcement concluded, Brian pulled Vanessa aside, speaking in hushed tones. "Listen carefully. This was an honest mistake, nothing more. Anyone could have mixed up those bottles. If anyone asks, the labels were unclear, and you had no reason to believe it wasn't water. Understand?" Sarah, still recording from a few feet away, captured this exchange as well. Malcolm sat with his head back, breathing carefully through the pain. Kyle looked at him with newfound understanding. "They didn't even apologize properly," Kyle muttered. "I've never seen anything like this." "I have," Malcolm responded quietly. "Just not usually with chemicals." As the plane taxied back to the gate, Malcolm noticed how Brian was already controlling the narrative, informing other passengers that there had been a minor mix-up and that some passengers have sensitive reactions. Through the window, Malcolm could see emergency vehicles with flashing lights approaching the terminal. The reality of the situation was setting in. What should have been a routine business trip had turned into yet another battle against discrimination. But this time, the stakes were literally life and death. The aircraft door opened, and paramedics rushed aboard. As they reached Malcolm with a gurney, he caught a final glimpse of Vanessa's pale, shocked face and Brian's calculating expression. This incident would not be brushed aside like so many others before it. Malcolm Pierce had built his career by transforming challenges into opportunities for change, and despite the pain searing his throat, his mind was already calculating how this moment might become a catalyst for something larger than himself. The harsh fluorescent lights of Denver Memorial Hospital cast an unflattering glow across the treatment room as Dr. Ellis examined Malcolm's throat with focused precision. The emergency landing had been executed smoothly, but the paramedics had insisted on immediate hospital transport given the nature of the chemical ingested. "You're fortunate you didn't swallow more than a small amount," Dr. Ellis explained, removing his examination equipment. "The cleaning solution contains sodium hydroxide, which can cause severe burns to the esophagus and digestive tract. We've administered medication to neutralize the chemical and protect your throat lining, but you'll need to follow up with a specialist when you return home." Malcolm nodded, his throat still raw despite the soothing effects of the medication. Speaking remained painful, but he managed to ask the question weighing on his mind. "Long-term effects? With proper treatment and the limited exposure, you should make a full recovery," Dr. Ellis replied. "But I want to emphasize how serious this could have been. Just a few more swallows could have resulted in permanent damage or worse. Kyle, who had insisted on accompanying Malcolm in the ambulance, sat in a chair nearby. Throughout their 15 years working together, he had always considered himself an ally. But the day's events had revealed gaps in his understanding that left him unsettled. "I can't believe they tried to play it off as just a simple mistake," Kyle said, shaking his head. "And that senior flight attendant, Brian? The way he looked at you. I've never noticed that kind of treatment before when we've traveled together." Malcolm attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's because it's usually more subtle. The difference between being asked, 'Can I help you?' and 'What are you doing here?' It's in the tone, the assumptions, the small indignities that accumulate over time." Dr. Ellis finished updating Malcolm's chart. "I'll have the nurse bring your discharge paperwork shortly. You should rest your throat as much as possible over the next few days." As the doctor left, two individuals in crisp corporate attire entered the room. The woman stepped forward with a practiced, sympathetic expression. "Mr. Pierce, I'm Jennifer Lawson, Vice President of Customer Relations for Atlantic Airways. This is our legal counsel, Richard Bennett. First, let me express our deepest regrets regarding this unfortunate incident." Her words were perfectly calibrated, acknowledging the event without admitting liability. Malcolm had heard similar corporate apologies throughout his career, usually when companies realized who he was after treating him poorly. "We'd like to offer our most sincere apologies and make things right," Lawson continued, opening a leather portfolio. "We've prepared a comprehensive compensation package, including reimbursement for all medical expenses, a full refund of your ticket, and additional flight vouchers for future travel." She slid a document across the bedside table.
"We just need your signature on this standard release form, which includes a confidentiality agreement."
"Once signed, we can process your compensation immediately." Kyle leaned forward, quickly scanning the document. "This is an NDA," he said flatly. "They want you to agree not to discuss what happened or take further action." Malcolm wasn't surprised. He'd encountered similar tactics before: silence in exchange for compensation, the corporate solution to problems they preferred to make disappear rather than address. Despite his throbbing throat, he needed to speak. "Not interested," he said, simply. Lawson's smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Pierce, I understand you've had an upsetting experience. This offer is substantially above our standard compensation package, in recognition of the unique circumstances." "The circumstances weren't unique," Malcolm replied, each word painful but necessary. "They were systemic. I assure you, Atlantic Airways has a strict non-discrimination policy," Lawson responded automatically. "This was clearly an isolated incident and simple human error." "Was it?" Kyle interjected. "Because from where I was sitting, nothing about this seemed random or simple." Richard Bennett cleared his throat. "We understand you're upset, but let's be careful about making unfounded accusations. Our flight attendant made an unfortunate mistake retrieving the wrong bottle. There's no evidence suggesting any discriminatory intent." As they spoke, a nurse entered with discharge papers. She was a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes that widened slightly in recognition when she saw Malcolm. "Mr. Pierce, I thought it was you. My son interned at Horizon Technologies last summer. The diversity program you started changed his life. He's finishing his computer science degree now." Malcolm smiled genuinely for the first time since the incident. "What's his name?" "Jamal Williams," she replied proudly. "He talks about your mentorship program all the time." The airline representative shifted uncomfortably during this exchange. Bennett checked his watch pointedly. "Mrs. Williams," Malcolm read from her name badge. "I'd love to hear how Jamal is doing, but could you give us a moment to finish up here?" After she stepped out, Malcolm turned back to the airline representatives. "I'm not signing your NDA. What happened today wasn't just about me. It's about a pattern of behavior that needs to be addressed." Lawson's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Mr. Pierce, be reasonable. We're offering a generous settlement. If you're implying this was some sort of discriminatory incident, that's a serious accusation that would be very difficult to prove." Malcolm's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was his daughter, Zoe, a sophomore at Harvard. He asked for a moment and answered. "Dad, are you okay? It's all over Twitter that the CEO of Horizon Technologies was poisoned on a flight." "I'm fine, Zoe. Just a mix-up with a drink," Malcolm assured her, aware of the airline representatives, listening intently. "A mix-up? Dad, people are saying it was a cleaning chemical." Zoe's voice carried her concern. "And there's already speculation about whether it was intentional because you're—" "We'll talk later, sweetheart. I'm being discharged soon," Malcolm interrupted gently. "Love you." As he ended the call, his phone immediately buzzed with notifications. The incident was spreading across social media platforms, with early reports varying wildly from minor incident to deliberate poisoning. Lawson and Bennett exchanged glances. "Mr. Pierce," Bennett said with new urgency, "given the misinformation already spreading, it would benefit everyone to resolve this matter quickly and privately." Before Malcolm could respond, his phone rang again. This time it was Atlantic Airways CEO Robert Chambers. "Pierce, Robert Chambers. Terrible business what happened. Just terrible. I wanted to personally assure you we're taking this very seriously. Jennifer and Richard have my full authority to resolve this to your satisfaction." What followed was a carefully worded apology that, like Lawson's earlier statement, acknowledged the incident without accepting responsibility or addressing its potentially discriminatory nature. As Chambers spoke, Malcolm reflected on advice his father had given him decades ago. A veteran of the civil rights movement, the elder Pierce had told his son, "When they hurt you and then rush to make it go away quietly, that's when you know you've got leverage to make real change." Have you ever been in a situation where someone offered you compensation to keep quiet about mistreatment? Comment number 1 if you believe Malcolm should sign the NDA and take the settlement, or comment number 2 if you think he should fight for accountability. If you're enjoying this story of resilience in the face of discrimination, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories. What would you do if you were in Malcolm's position? Would you accept a private settlement or use your platform to expose systemic issues? As we continue with Malcolm's story, we'll see how his decision sends shockwaves throughout the airline industry and beyond. The video appeared on Twitter first. 23 seconds of footage captured by Sarah Chen showed Malcolm coughing violently after drinking from the bottle, followed by Brian Thompson telling Vanessa that these people always make a scene. The caption read, "Black CEO given cleaning chemicals instead of water on Atlantic Airways flight. This wasn't an accident. The flying while black jarred justice for Malcolm." Within hours, the video had been viewed 2 million times. By the following morning, Malcolm's discharge from Denver Memorial Hospital was captured by local news stations, their cameras documenting his dignified exit. He made no statement, but his composed demeanor spoke volumes, contrasting sharply with the chaos unfolding on social media and in Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters. The hashtags "Jars Justice for Malcolm" and "Flying While Black" are trending nationwide, reported CNN's morning anchor. Atlantic Airways stock has dropped 8% since markets opened as calls for boycotts gain momentum. In a sterile conference room at the Denver Marriott, Malcolm sat with his executive team who had flown in overnight. On the wall-mounted television, Atlantic Airways' hastily arranged press conference was beginning. "Atlantic Airways deeply regrets the incident involving Mr. Pierce," the airline's spokesperson read from a prepared statement. "This unfortunate accident resulted from mislabeled containers and human error. We have reached out to Mr. Pierce and are cooperating fully with the ongoing investigation. Atlantic Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind." Kyle muted the television. "That's their strategy. Call it an accident, mention their non-discrimination policy, and hope it all blows over." Sarah Chen, who had taken the first flight to Denver after her video went viral, nodded in agreement. "They're already pushing back against the discrimination angle. Their social media team is highlighting their diversity initiatives and posting photos of their minority employees." Malcolm's phone had not stopped buzzing since the incident. Calls from major news outlets, civil rights organizations, and even politicians seeking to align themselves with the story poured in. His PR director, Tanya Morris, had been filtering requests, but the pressure for Malcolm to make a public statement was mounting. Your silence is creating a vacuum they're trying to fill with their narrative, Tanya advised. We need to take control of the story. Malcolm's throat still burned from the chemical exposure, a constant reminder of what had happened. What's the latest from our legal team? Marcus Washington, Horizon's general counsel, consulted his tablet. We've documented everything. Dr. Johnson has provided a statement confirming the seriousness of the chemical ingestion. Sarah's video is compelling evidence, especially with Thompson's comments captured clearly. We have grounds for a substantial lawsuit. But this isn't just about litigation, Malcolm said, his voice still raspy. This is about accountability and systemic change. On the television, now showing a panel discussion about the incident, commentators were already dividing along predictable lines. Some characterized it as a simple mistake being weaponized for financial gain. Others pointed to the long history of discriminatory treatment faced by black travelers, contextualizing Malcolm's experience within broader patterns. Mr. Pierce is a wealthy CEO trying to leverage an honest mistake into a payday, argued a conservative pundit. The flight attendant didn't know who he was when she accidentally gave him the wrong bottle. That's precisely the point, countered the other panelist. Would she have made that mistake if he were a white CEO? Would the senior flight attendant have dismissed his distress so casually? The evidence suggests not. As the day progressed, the story evolved. Internet sleuths uncovered Brian Thompson's social media history, revealing posts with subtle but unmistakable racial bias. One tweet from 3 years earlier complained about diversity hiring lowering standards, while another criticized people who play the race card whenever they don't get their way. These discoveries fueled new waves of outrage. Atlantic Airways issued a second statement, distancing themselves from Thompson's personal views while reiterating that the incident was an unfortunate accident, unrelated to racial bias. By evening, the airline's damage control efforts intensified. They announced that both Vanessa Mitchell and Brian Thompson had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, a move that appeared proactive but came only after public pressure made it unavoidable. Malcolm watched these developments with the calculated patience that had guided his business success. When Tanya suggested a major televised interview to present his side, he agreed it was time. Jessica Palmer at GNN, Tanya recommended. She's fair, thorough, and has a reputation for asking tough questions of both sides. That lends credibility to whatever platform you choose. The interview was arranged for the following evening, giving Malcolm time to rest his voice and prepare. When the cameras went live, millions tuned in to hear directly from the man at the center of the controversy. Mr. Pierce, thank you for speaking with us, Palmer began. First, how are you feeling physically after this incident? I'm recovering, Malcolm replied, his voice still noticeably affected. The doctors say there shouldn't be permanent damage, but it's been painful. Can you walk us through what happened on that flight? With measured precision, Malcolm recounted the events, the initial boarding, the different treatment he received compared to Kyle, the repeated requests for water, and finally, being served the cleaning solution. He spoke without accusation or emotion, presenting the facts as they occurred. Do you believe what happened was racially motivated? Palmer asked directly. Malcolm paused, considering his words carefully. I believe what happened reflects biases that exist throughout our society. Would a white CEO in a tailored suit have been questioned about sitting in first class? Would his repeated request for water have been ignored? Would his obvious distress have been dismissed as making a scene? History and experience suggest otherwise. Atlantic Airways maintains this was simply an unfortunate accident, Palmer noted. I've spent my career in technology, where we analyze patterns to identify problems, Malcolm responded. When a pattern emerges consistently, as it has throughout my life and the lives of countless other Black Americans, it's not a series of accidents. It's a system functioning as designed. The interview humanized Malcolm in ways social media clips couldn't. He spoke about growing up as the son of an electrical engineer and a schoolteacher in Baltimore, about scholarships that took him to MIT, and about founding Horizon Technologies with a mission to create more equitable access to cybersecurity tools. When Palmer asked about his daughter, Malcolm's composure momentarily softened. Zoe is 19. She's brilliant, studying computer science at Harvard. And despite all her accomplishments, she still faces the same assumptions and obstacles I did, just in different forms. That's why this matters beyond one incident on one flight. As the interview concluded, Palmer asked about Malcolm's next steps. "I'm not interested in financial compensation," he stated firmly. "I'm interested in real change. Atlantic Airways has an opportunity to acknowledge the problem honestly and become a leader in addressing it. My team has reached out to their leadership with specific proposals for systemic improvements in training, accountability, and corporate culture." The interview resonated powerfully. Within hours, public opinion had solidified largely in Malcolm's favor. His thoughtful, measured approach contrasted sharply with the defensive, legalistic responses from Atlantic Airways. The airline's stock continued its downward slide as boycott pledges gained momentum. Corporate clients began reconsidering their travel contracts, concerned about both practical disruptions and potential association with a discrimination scandal. The following morning, another bombshell dropped. An anonymous source leaked internal emails from Atlantic Airways' crisis management team, revealing their strategy focused on containing financial damage rather than addressing underlying issues. One particularly damaging exchange showed a senior executive questioning whether making substantive changes to diversity protocols was worth the operational disruption, given that the controversy would likely blow over in a few news cycles. The leaked emails transformed what might have been a temporary public relations challenge into an existential crisis for the airline. Shareholders demanded accountability. Partner companies issued statements distancing themselves from Atlantic Airways, and a growing chorus of voices, ranging from civil rights organizations to corporate leaders, rallied behind Malcolm's call for meaningful change. In the eye of this storm, Malcolm maintained the same steady leadership that had built Horizon Technologies. He understood that moments of crisis often presented the greatest opportunities for transformation, both personal and institutional. As pressure mounted on Atlantic Airways to respond more substantively, Malcolm prepared for the next phase of a battle he had not chosen, but was uniquely positioned to fight. The question was no longer whether the airline would be forced to change, but how comprehensive that change would be, and whether it would represent genuine transformation or merely the appearance of it. The Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters in Dallas hummed with unusual tension. Emergency meetings filled every conference room as executives, legal teams, and crisis management consultants worked to contain the expanding fallout. In the largest boardroom, CEO Robert Chambers faced his executive leadership team across a gleaming mahogany table. "The Department of Transportation has officially opened an investigation," announced Elaine Winters, Chief Legal Officer, her voice tight with controlled stress. "The FAA is conducting a separate inquiry into our safety protocols regarding chemical storage. 3 civil rights organizations have filed formal complaints, and our preliminary internal investigation has complications." Chambers, a silver-haired veteran of airline industry turbulence, pinched the bridge of his nose. "Define complications." Winters glanced at her notes unnecessarily. She knew the details by heart. Flight attendant Vanessa Mitchell's initial statement indicated she grabbed the bottle in haste, but claims the storage procedures were confusing. However, our environmental services team confirms all cleaning supplies should have been in a completely separate galley compartment, clearly labeled. "And Thompson?" Chambers asked. Brian Thompson maintains he responded appropriately to a passenger in distress. He denies making any discriminatory comments despite the video evidence. He's hired personal counsel and is arguing the recording was taken out of context. Outside the corporate bubble, a different kind of investigation was taking shape. Malcolm had engaged Grace Washington, a prominent civil rights attorney with extensive experience in discrimination cases. Her Washington, D.C. office had become command central for building what was rapidly evolving from an individual complaint into a landmark case. "We've been contacted by 27 former and current Atlantic Airways employees," Grace informed Malcolm during their morning video conference. "They're providing documentation of discriminatory practices going back years." Malcolm, back in Atlanta but still recovering, listened intently as his legal team outlined the emerging pattern. Black passengers routinely subjected to extra scrutiny and diminished service. Minority employees passed over for promotions despite superior qualifications. Complaints filed and quietly buried by human resources. What's most significant, Grace continued, is the evidence of previous incidents similar to yours that were settled with NDAs. We've identified 5 cases where minority passengers were served contaminated food or beverages over the past decade. In each instance, the airline paid for silence. Malcolm's expression remained impassive, but his eyes reflected a weary familiarity with the pattern. They tried the same approach with me. With a crucial difference, Grace noted. Those passengers didn't have your resources or platform. Atlantic Airways believed they could make this disappear as they had before. Across town in a modest apartment, Vanessa Mitchell sat alone, television muted, but showing continuous coverage of the unfolding scandal. Her phone buzzed with another message from Brian Thompson. Remember, stick to the script. Accident. Mislabeling. No discriminatory intent. We're in this together. They weren't in it together, though. As a flight attendant with just 3 years' experience, Vanessa had been heavily influenced by Thompson, a 20-year veteran who supervised her training. His subtle comments and behavior had shaped her perceptions of passengers, particularly minorities in first class. Now she was realizing how she'd been manipulated, and the price she might pay for someone else's prejudice. Her gaze drifted to the business card on her coffee table. Grace Washington, attorney at law. After 3 sleepless nights and watching Malcolm Pierce's measured, dignified interview, Vanessa had made a confidential call to his legal team. The airline's internal investigation was moving in predictable directions. They had appointed an independent law firm with long-standing ties to Atlantic Airways to review the incident. Their preliminary findings emphasized procedural failures in chemical storage rather than potential discrimination, a framing that conveniently shifted focus from bias to logistics. Meanwhile, the parallel investigations by regulatory bodies were proceeding with methodical thoroughness. FAA inspectors conducted surprise checks of chemical storage procedures on Atlantic Airways flights. Department of Transportation officials interviewed flight crews about training protocols and diversity practices. Most concerning for the airline, security footage from the aircraft had mysteriously disappeared. The standard cameras that captured the galley area supposedly experienced technical difficulties during the critical period when Vanessa retrieved the bottle. The timing is suspicious at best, Grace told Malcolm during their update meeting. We've filed a motion to preserve all evidence and issued subpoenas for maintenance records of the camera system. As these formal processes advanced, a more informal investigation was unfolding online. Social media users combed through years of passenger complaints against Atlantic Airways, identifying patterns that mainstream outlets were now reporting. Former employees shared their experiences through anonymous accounts, creating a damning composite of corporate culture. The airline's attempts to control the narrative were failing. Their carefully crafted statements rang hollow against the mounting evidence. When they announced a 1-day diversity and inclusion training for all staff, the response was immediate skepticism. You can't fix systemic discrimination with a PowerPoint presentation, Malcolm commented when asked about the initiative during a brief press interaction. Within the airline, fault lines were appearing. Some executives argued for meaningful change, recognizing both the moral imperative and business necessity. Others focused solely on legal exposure and stock prices, advocating for minimal concessions wrapped in maximum public relations spin. The tension came to a head when Vanessa Mitchell, after days of internal struggle, made her decision. She contacted Grace Washington to schedule a formal meeting. In a secured conference room at Grace's firm, Vanessa spoke quietly but clearly, as her statement was recorded. Brian Thompson has a history of making discriminatory comments about passengers of color, especially those in first class or business cabins, she revealed. He trained me and other new flight attendants to watch certain passengers more carefully, questioning their boarding passes or upgrade status if they didn't look like they belonged. Her voice trembled slightly. After the incident with Mr. Pierce, Brian told me exactly what to say. He said the airline would protect us if we stuck to the accident story, but that we'd be on our own if I mentioned his comments or training methods. Grace's team documented Vanessa's testimony methodically, building a case that went far beyond a single incident to expose systematic discrimination within Atlantic Airways. "The airline will likely terminate me for this," Vanessa acknowledged as the interview concluded. "I don't expect sympathy. I participated in their system. But Mr. Pierce could have been seriously harmed, and pretending it was just an accident won't prevent it from happening to someone else." As Vanessa's testimony entered the official record, Malcolm's lawsuit against Atlantic Airways took definitive shape. The claims went beyond personal injury to allege pattern and practice discrimination, creating potential liability that dwarfed any previous settlements the airline had paid. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only Malcolm's resolve but also the airline industry's willingness to address its deep-seated biases. As pressure mounted from all sides, Atlantic Airways faced a choice between meaningful transformation and a protracted battle they were increasingly unlikely to win. The backlash began subtly at first. Conservative media outlets ran segments questioning Malcolm's motives. "Is the CEO using race card for financial gain?" ran one headline. "Accident or opportunity? How a spilled drink became a crusade," declared another. Malcolm had anticipated this response. Throughout his career, he'd observed how claims of discrimination were often met with character assassination. What he hadn't fully prepared for was the intensity and coordination of the campaign against him. Right-wing commentators described him as race-baiting and exploiting a simple mistake. One particularly vocal host told viewers, "This millionaire CEO is trying to squeeze more millions from a hard-working American company because a flight attendant accidentally gave him the wrong bottle. Haven't we had enough of these professional victims?" Atlantic Airways had hired Brunswick Strategic Communications, a firm known for aggressive reputation management and plaintiff discreditation. Their playbook became evident as identical talking points appeared across multiple platforms simultaneously. The airline officially maintained a respectful public stance while privately enabling the smear campaign. "Atlantic Airways respects Mr. Pierce's right to pursue legal remedies while we continue our internal investigation," their statement read, even as their consultants worked to undermine his credibility. The pressure extended beyond media narratives. Malcolm began receiving death threats on social media and via email. "Go back to coach where you belong," was among the milder messages. The more explicit ones required Horizon Technologies to increase security at their headquarters and assign personal protection to Malcolm and his family. Kyle Reynolds witnessed the transformation with growing discomfort. "I never realized how vicious this could get," he confessed during a crisis management meeting at Horizon. "They're acting like you're attacking the very fabric of society by calling out what happened." Malcolm nodded grimly. "That's exactly what they think I'm doing. Systems of privilege don't surrender power easily." The attacks grew more personal as opposition researchers dug into Malcolm's past. A minor disciplinary incident from his sophomore year at MIT, a heated argument with a professor who had made racially insensitive comments, was reframed as evidence of an angry temperament. A parking ticket from 5 years earlier became disregard for rules. Each trivial finding was amplified to suggest a pattern of behavior that contradicted his public image. Most disturbing was the impact on Malcolm's daughter. Zoe called one evening, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Dad, it's getting weird here. Some students started a Stand with Atlantic group. They're saying you're hurting American businesses and destroying jobs with your crusade." One of my professors asked if I was comfortable being in class while the discussion about your case was happening. Malcolm's chest tightened. "Zoe, I'm so sorry. I can talk to the administration if—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "I'm not backing down either. I just wanted you to know what's happening. My roommate Jessica has been amazing, standing up for me. And most people are supportive. It's just, I never realized how ugly things could get when you challenge the status quo." As public opinion battles raged, corporate pressures mounted as well. Several Horizon Technologies board members had received calls from investors concerned about distractions from core business operations. Two suggested that Malcolm take a temporary leave of absence until the legal matter is resolved. During an emergency board meeting, these concerns surfaced formally. Richard Patel, representing a major investment group, spoke carefully. The company's stock has dropped 8% since this began. Clients are asking questions about leadership stability. Perhaps it would be prudent for Malcolm to step back temporarily while the president handles day-to-day operations. Malcolm, listen patiently to these arguments before responding. When I founded this company, I established core values that include integrity and equal treatment for all. If I step back now because it's uncomfortable or financially expedient, what message does that send to our employees, to our clients, to my daughter? He paused, looking each board member in the eye. This isn't a distraction from our mission. This is our mission. We build security systems to protect people equally, regardless of who they are. If I can't stand up when I'm personally affected by discrimination, how can we claim to stand for equality in our business practices? The boardroom fell silent. Kyle spoke first. I support Malcolm completely. This is exactly the leadership we've always valued. Sarah Chen nodded in agreement. Our largest clients have actually expressed support privately, even if they're not making public statements. They respect a leader who stands by his principles. By meeting's end, the board had unanimously backed Malcolm's continued leadership. It was a victory, but the broader battle continued intensifying. At Atlantic Airways, Vanessa Mitchell was summarily terminated after her cooperation with Malcolm's legal team became known. The official reason was violation of company confidentiality policies, but the message was clear. Loyalty to the airline trumped truth or justice. Brian Thompson, meanwhile, received what amounted to a promotion. He was moved to a management position in crew training at the Dallas headquarters, away from direct passenger contact but with increased influence over airline culture and practices. The contrast between these two outcomes didn't go unnoticed. Several flight attendants anonymously shared the news with both Malcolm's legal team and sympathetic journalists, creating another wave of negative coverage for the airline. Have you ever stood up against discrimination and faced backlash for speaking truth? Comment number 1, if you've experienced retaliation for challenging injustice, or comment number 2 if you believe businesses should be held accountable for discrimination. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories about courage in the face of adversity. As we continue Malcolm's journey, how do you think he should respond to these escalating attacks? Should he compromise to protect his company and family from further harassment, or should he stand firm regardless of personal cost? The answer might surprise you as our story continues. The recording arrived anonymously in an encrypted email to Grace Washington's legal team. The file contained 3 separate conversations captured on Brian Thompson's crew training sessions, each more damning than the last. First class isn't for everyone, Thompson's voice instructed a group of trainees. Some passengers, especially certain demographics, won't meet the standard of service we expect. Your job is to maintain those standards without creating a scene. In another segment, when you see someone who doesn't fit the profile, double-check their boarding pass. Better to verify than to let service standards slip. Most explicit was a conversation recorded during a break when Thompson believed only sympathetic colleagues were present. This whole Pierce situation is ridiculous. Guy drinks the wrong thing and suddenly it's a federal case because he's black and has money. 20 years ago, people knew their place. Grace played the recordings for Malcolm in her office, watching his face remain impassive despite the blatant prejudice. These are game changers, she said after the final clip ended. They establish a pattern of discriminatory training that permeated the airline's culture. Malcolm nodded slowly. Not just evidence of individual bias, but institutionalized discrimination. Exactly. This transforms our case from an isolated incident to a systemic failure. Within hours of filing these recordings as evidence in Malcolm's lawsuit, the legal landscape shifted dramatically. Atlantic Airways attorneys requested an emergency conference with the judge, suddenly eager to discuss settlement options they had previously dismissed. Simultaneously, a parallel development unfolded. 5 former black flight attendants contacted Grace's office, describing their experiences with discriminatory practices at Atlantic Airways. Each had faced career obstacles after reporting incidents of bias, eventually leaving the airline. Together, they formed the foundation for a class action lawsuit that would expand the scope of the case exponentially. Media coverage pivoted from questioning Malcolm's motives to examining Atlantic Airways' corporate culture. Even conservative outlets found it difficult to defend the explicit bias in Thompson's recordings. Business publications analyzed the financial implications of the expanding legal exposure, with analysts projecting potential damages in the tens of millions. Major corporate clients began publicly suspending their contracts with Atlantic Airways. Tech companies, particularly conscious of diversity issues in their own industry, led the exodus. Within a week, the airline had lost 28% of its business passenger revenue. The airline's stock plummeted, triggering an emergency board meeting. Financial concerns finally accomplished what moral arguments had not. The board demanded immediate decisive action from company leadership. As these developments unfolded, Malcolm received an unexpected invitation to testify before a congressional committee examining discrimination in the service industry. His testimony would place his experience in the context of broader systemic issues affecting millions of Americans. The hearing room hummed with anticipation as Malcolm took his seat at the witness table. Cameras tracked his every movement. Congressional representatives from both parties prepared their questions, each viewing the high-profile witness through their particular political lens. "Mr. Pierce," began Congresswoman Eleanor Hayes, chair of the committee, "thank you for appearing today. Could you describe the incident on Atlantic Airways and its broader implications for American consumers?" Malcolm spoke with measured clarity, his voice fully recovered but carrying new authority born from recent experiences. "What happened to me was not unique," he testified. "It was simply visible because of my position. Millions of Americans face similar discrimination daily without cameras recording it, without the resources to fight back, without a platform to speak out. They board planes, enter stores, check into hotels, and apply for jobs facing assumptions about who they are and how they should be treated based solely on their appearance." For over an hour, Malcolm answered questions with the same thoughtful precision that had built his technology empire. He avoided partisan framing, focusing instead on practical solutions and accountability measures that could address discrimination across industries. The testimony resonated far beyond Washington. Across the country, viewers recognized their own experiences in Malcolm's descriptions of the constant calculation of how to respond to bias without reinforcing stereotypes. While Malcolm was still in Washington, Atlantic Airways Board of Directors called an emergency session. CEO Robert Chambers found himself fighting for his position as shareholders demanded leadership changes in response to the crisis. The quarterly projections show a 40% revenue decrease if current trends continue, the CFO reported grimly. Major partners are invoking reputation damage clauses in their contracts. We're facing an existential threat to the airline's survival. After hours of heated debate, the board reached its decision. Chambers would step aside, replaced by interim CEO Diana Patel, previously the company's highest-ranking woman of color, as Senior VP of Operations. Her mandate was clear: transform the company's culture and rebuild public trust, starting with resolving the Pierce case. Meanwhile, Vanessa Mitchell had been struggling to find new employment. Blacklisted in the airline industry and drained financially, she reached a breaking point. Against her attorney's advice, she scheduled a television interview to tell her complete story. "I was trained to view certain passengers with suspicion based on their race," she explained to the interviewer. "Brian Thompson taught us to scrutinize black passengers in premium cabins, to check their boarding passes multiple times, to provide different levels of service. When I realized what I'd done to Mr. Pierce, what I'd been participating in all along, I couldn't stay silent." Her testimony, coming from within the system, carried unique credibility. Viewers could see her genuine remorse and her courage in facing consequences for speaking truth. The day after Vanessa's interview aired, Malcolm contacted her through their respective attorneys. "I'd like to meet with Ms. Mitchell," he requested. "Not for legal purposes, but person to person." The meeting occurred in a private room at Grace Washington's law firm. When Vanessa entered, visibly nervous, Malcolm stood to greet her. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Mr. Pierce, I'm so sorry for what happened," Vanessa began, her voice breaking. "I will regret it for the rest of my life." We all participate in systems without fully examining them, Malcolm replied. What matters is what we do when we recognize the truth. Their conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, moving from the specific incident to the larger cultural forces that had shaped both their actions that day. As they concluded, Malcolm made an unexpected offer. Horizon Technologies is expanding our customer experience division. We need people who understand how bias operates in service industries and can help build better systems. Someone with your perspective and demonstrated commitment to change would be valuable. If you're interested, I'd like you to meet with our HR director. Vanessa stared in disbelief. After what I did to you? Because of what you did afterward, Malcolm corrected gently. Standing up for truth despite personal cost is exactly the quality we value. That evening, as Malcolm briefed his executive team on the Washington hearings, his assistant interrupted with breaking news. Atlantic Airways just released a statement. They've fired Brian Thompson and announced a complete restructuring of their leadership team. The airline's press release included language unprecedented in corporate communications. Atlantic Airways acknowledges that the incident involving Mr. Malcolm Pierce reflects systemic failures in our culture and practices. We take full responsibility for the discriminatory treatment he experienced and are committed to fundamental transformation of our company. The statement outlined specific changes: mandatory independent bias audits, revised training programs, developed in consultation with civil rights organizations, transparent reporting of customer complaints involving potential discrimination, and a diverse oversight board with actual authority to implement changes. Most significantly, the new interim CEO requested a personal meeting with Malcolm to discuss not just settlement terms, but a potential ongoing advisory relationship to guide their reform efforts. Kyle looked up from the press release in amazement. They've completely capitulated. This is everything we asked for and more. Malcolm nodded thoughtfully. This isn't capitulation. It's transformation. They've recognized that addressing discrimination isn't just legally necessary, it's good business. The tide had turned. What began as a single act of discrimination had catalyzed a movement for accountability that extended far beyond one airline or one incident. As Malcolm prepared to meet with Atlantic Airways' new leadership, he recognized that the painful journey had created an opportunity for change that would benefit countless travelers who would never know his name. The conference room at Atlantic Airways headquarters had been transformed. Where portraits of former CEOs, all white men, once hung, the walls now displayed the company's new mission statement, with dignity and respect for all prominently featured. Acting CEO Diana Patel had orchestrated these changes as visible symbols of the deeper transformation underway. Malcolm entered flanked by Grace Washington and his executive team. The airline representatives rose respectfully, a marked contrast to his previous interactions with the company. Mr. Pierce, Diana began, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We recognize that words alone cannot address what happened to you or the systemic issues it revealed. We're prepared to take concrete actions that demonstrate our commitment to change. Grace opened her portfolio. We've reviewed your preliminary proposal. While the financial terms are acceptable, my client is more concerned with structural reforms. Diana nodded. As am I. Financial settlements without cultural transformation merely bury problems until the next incident. What followed was not a typical legal negotiation, but a collaborative blueprint for institutional change. Malcolm's team had prepared detailed recommendations based on best practices across industries, while Atlantic Airways presented their internal assessment of cultural and procedural failures. Bias training isn't enough, Malcolm emphasized. You need accountability systems that measure actual behavior and outcomes, not just completion of training modules. Agreed, Diana replied. We've already begun implementing real-time feedback mechanisms and mystery passenger programs that specifically monitor treatment of minority travelers. The discussion continued for hours, addressing everything from hiring practices to complaint procedures to supplier diversity. By day's end, they had outlined what would become known in business schools as the Atlantic Model for institutional transformation, a comprehensive approach to addressing systemic discrimination that would later be adopted across multiple industries. As the legal teams finalized documents, Malcolm and Diana spoke privately. "This will be difficult," Malcolm acknowledged. "You'll face resistance from within and skepticism from without." Diana's expression remained determined. "Necessary change usually is. But what's the alternative? Continue practices that are not only morally wrong but increasingly bad business? The marketplace is evolving. Companies that fail to provide equal treatment to all customers won't survive." The settlement was announced the following morning. Beyond substantial financial compensation, most of which Malcolm directed to scholarships for minority students in aviation and technology, the agreement included unprecedented commitments: a complete restructuring of Atlantic Airways training programs, developed in consultation with civil rights experts, transparent reporting of discrimination complaints and resolutions, independent audits of customer service interactions across demographic groups, a diverse oversight committee with authority to implement binding recommendations, industry-leading representation targets for minorities in leadership positions, regular climate surveys measuring employee experiences across demographic groups. Most remarkably, Malcolm would chair an independent advisory board overseeing implementation, with authority to publicize compliance failures without legal constraint. The business press described the settlement as revolutionary and a new standard for corporate accountability. Stock in Atlantic Airways, which had plummeted during the crisis, stabilized as investors recognized the company's authentic commitment to reform. Brian Thompson, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. Investigations into his conduct revealed that he had deliberately tampered with evidence, deleting security footage and pressuring colleagues to alter statements. Criminal charges for obstruction of justice and witness tampering followed his termination, with potential penalties including substantial fines and possible incarceration. Vanessa Mitchell began her new position at Horizon Technologies, where she helped develop training programs addressing unconscious bias in customer service. Her first-hand experience with discriminatory systems proved invaluable in creating effective interventions. For Malcolm, the resolution brought validation, but little personal satisfaction. The incident had forced him to confront painful realities. He normally navigated in silence, and the public nature of the controversy had exposed his family to scrutiny and harassment. His relationship with his daughter had deepened through the shared experience. When Zoe called to discuss a discrimination incident in her computer science program, their conversation reflected new dimensions of understanding. "I handled it the way you did, Dad," she explained. "Documented everything, stayed professional, but didn't back down or pretend it wasn't happening." "And the outcome?" Malcolm asked. "The professor apologized and changed how group assignments are structured. But more importantly, other students spoke up too. It wasn't just me fighting alone." This, Malcolm realized, represented the true victory. Not the settlement or the policy changes, but the ripple effects of standing firm against discrimination. Throughout his career, he had often chosen to absorb individual slights silently, rather than risk being labeled difficult or problematic. That calculation had changed forever. At the industry conference that had been his original destination, rescheduled following his recovery, Malcolm delivered a keynote address that departed from his planned topics in cybersecurity. Instead, he addressed the intersection of technology, power, and accountability. "Technology amplifies existing social structures," he told the audience. "It can either reinforce bias or help dismantle it. As industry leaders, we have a responsibility to examine the systems we create and ask who they serve, who they exclude, and who they silence." The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. In the months that followed, airlines across the industry began reviewing their own practices, motivated by both ethical concerns and practical business considerations. The Atlantic incident had demonstrated the financial consequences of discrimination in an age of social media and heightened consumer consciousness. Malcolm found himself increasingly called upon to consult with companies seeking to address systemic bias proactively rather than reactively. Horizon Technologies established a new division focused on equity auditing software, helping organizations identify patterns of differential treatment before they escalated into crises. As the one-year anniversary of the incident approached, Malcolm reflected on its complex legacy. The personal cost had been substantial: the stress, the public scrutiny, the ongoing security concerns. Yet the impact extended far beyond his individual experience, creating ripples of change throughout industries and institutions. What began with a burning sensation in his throat had evolved into a burning passion to transform systems that had too long remained unexamined and unchanged. Malcolm Pierce had never sought to become an agent of social change, but having been thrust into that role, he embraced it with the same strategic vision and determination that had built his technology empire. 6 months after the settlement, Malcolm boarded an Atlantic Airways flight from Atlanta to San Francisco, the same route where everything had begun. The choice was deliberate, a personal test of whether substantive change had occurred beyond the press releases and policy documents. The differences were immediately apparent. The gate agent greeted him with genuine professionalism. The flight attendants, now part of the first class to complete the airline's redesigned training program, provided attentive service without the scrutiny or suspicion he had previously experienced. "Good morning, Mr. Pierce," said the lead flight attendant, a black woman named Jasmine Williams who had been promoted under the airline's new advancement initiatives. "Welcome aboard. Would you like still water, sparkling water, or perhaps coffee before takeoff?" The simple transaction, being offered water respectfully, carried symbolic weight that wasn't lost on either of them. Malcolm noticed Jasmine wore a small pin reading "Dignity and Respect Champion," part of Atlantic's new recognition program for employees who exemplified their reformed values. "Still water, please," Malcolm replied with a smile. "Thank you." The flight proceeded without incident, remarkably unremarkable in its normalcy, which itself represented extraordinary progress. As Malcolm observed the crew's interactions with other passengers, he noted the consistent treatment across demographics. The changes weren't just cosmetic, they had penetrated operational reality. Upon landing in San Francisco, Malcolm found Diana Patel waiting to greet him at the gate. Now confirmed as permanent CEO after the successful interim period, she had overseen transformation extending far beyond the terms of the settlement. "We've implemented the advisory board's recommendations at all 67 destinations," Diana reported as they walked to the airline's executive lounge. "Complaint rates for discriminatory treatment have dropped 82%. Employee satisfaction scores among minority staff have increased by 44%. And our customer loyalty metrics are reaching pre-crisis levels." Malcolm nodded, appreciatively. The real test will be sustaining these changes over time, especially when media attention fades. "That's why we've built accountability into our compensation structures," Diana explained. "Every executive's bonus now includes diversity and inclusion metrics with real financial consequences. Self-interest is a powerful motivator." The transformation at Atlantic Airways had become a case study in corporate responsibility, featured at business schools nationwide. What distinguished their approach was its comprehensive nature, addressing not just individual behaviors but systems, incentives, and cultural norms. Meanwhile, the ripple effects from Malcolm's stand continued expanding. The class action lawsuit, filed by former Atlantic employees, had been settled with significant compensation and industry-wide hiring reforms. Brian Thompson had pleaded guilty to evidence tampering charges, receiving probation and community service requirements that included working with anti-discrimination organizations. Most significantly, the Department of Transportation had used findings from the Atlantic case to establish new industry-wide standards for non-discriminatory service, with compliance audits and meaningful penalties for violations. For Malcolm personally, the experience had crystallized his sense of purpose. While continuing to lead Horizon Technology's core business, he had established the Pierce Foundation to help minorities in corporate America navigate discrimination and advocate for systemic change. The foundation provided legal support, leadership development, and organizational consulting, creating infrastructure for transformation that extended beyond individual cases to address root causes. Its signature program, From Incident to Influence, helped people convert discriminatory experiences into leverage for institutional change. On a warm May afternoon, Malcolm stood in the auditorium at Harvard University, watching with paternal pride as Zoe approached the podium as valedictorian of her class. Her speech addressed the intersection of technology, ethics, and social responsibility, themes that reflected both her academic excellence and their shared experiences. Progress isn't a one-time achievement, but a continuous commitment, Zoe told her classmates. Each of us will face moments when we must decide whether to accept injustice for personal comfort or demand change at personal cost. In those moments, remember that individual actions create collective possibility. Malcolm recognized his own influence in her words, but also the unique wisdom she had developed through her generation's perspective. As her speech concluded to enthusiastic applause, he reflected on how their relationship had evolved through shared adversity into deeper understanding and mutual respect. Later that evening, as they celebrated at dinner, Zoe shared news about her post-graduation plans. The tech giants all made offers, but I've decided to join a smaller firm focusing on algorithmic bias auditing. They're doing pioneering work, examining how AI systems can perpetuate discrimination if not properly designed and monitored. Malcolm nodded appreciatively, unsurprised by her choice to prioritize impact over prestige. They're lucky to have you. I learned from watching you this past year, Dad, Zoe said, how you turned something terrible into something transformative, not just winning the battle, but changing the war. 2 weeks later, Malcolm met with a young black entrepreneur who had developed promising innovations in network security but struggled to secure funding despite impressive metrics. After reviewing his business plan, Malcolm offered both investment and mentorship. The technology is outstanding, Malcolm told him, but equally important is preparing you for the landscape you'll navigate as a black founder. Technical excellence alone won't shield you from biased assumptions. As they discussed strategies for pitching to investors, navigating industry networks, and building resilient leadership, Malcolm shared lessons from his own journey, including the Atlantic Airways incident and its aftermath. When discrimination happens, and it will, Malcolm advised, you'll face a choice between expedient silence and costly advocacy. There's no single right answer, and each situation requires strategic calculation. But remember that systems only change when challenged, and your stand might create space for others to follow. The entrepreneur nodded thoughtfully. I followed your example closely. What impressed me most wasn't just that you fought back, but how you fought, transforming an individual incident into institutional change. Malcolm smiled, recognizing in this young innovator the same determination and strategic thinking that had guided his own career. The cycle of mentorship and empowerment continued, creating new pathways through persistent barriers. That evening, Malcolm received a message from Diana Patel. Atlantic Airways had been named Most Improved in Customer Satisfaction across demographic groups by an independent consumer research firm. The accompanying data showed consistently equitable service metrics across races, ages, and genders, evidence that systemic change, while difficult, was genuinely possible. As Malcolm prepared for bed, he glanced at the framed words on his office wall, advice his father had given him decades earlier that had guided his response to the Atlantic incident and its aftermath. When they hurt you, make it matter. Turn injury into improvement, not just for yourself but for those who will follow. A single act of discrimination, a flight attendant giving cleaning solution instead of water, had catalyzed transformation extending far beyond one airline or one individual. The incident had revealed hidden biases, challenged comfortable assumptions, and demonstrated how individual courage could create collective change. Malcolm Pierce had never sought to become an agent of transformation, but having been thrust into that role through circumstance and choice, he had leveraged his position, resources, and strategic thinking to ensure that what happened to him would matter, not just as a momentary headline or corporate crisis, but as a catalyst for enduring change. As he drifted toward sleep, Malcolm reflected on how far things had come and how far they still needed to go. The work of transformation was never complete, but each step created possibility for the next. From a burning sensation in his throat had emerged a burning determination that would continue to fuel progress long after the original incident faded from public memory. What would you do if faced with discrimination? Would you have the courage to stand up not just for yourself, but for systemic change? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you, Please like and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about overcoming injustice. And don't forget to hit that share button. Someone in your network might need to hear this message of resilience and transformation today. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Malcolm's story. And remember, individual courage creates collective change. This story illustrates how systemic racism often hides in plain sight until a dramatic incident forces acknowledgement. Malcolm's experience shows that addressing discrimination requires more than individual responses. It demands institutional transformation. The most powerful change comes when those with privilege and power recognize their responsibility to challenge unjust systems rather than benefit from them silently. True leadership means using personal pain as catalyst for collective improvement, not seeking private compensation, but systemic accountability. The airline's eventual turnaround demonstrates that ethical practices and business success aren't opposing forces, but complementary goals. Most importantly, Malcolm teaches us that dignity isn't negotiable, and standing firm against discrimination despite backlash creates pathways for others to follow. His strategic response, documenting evidence, building coalitions, rejecting silence, and demanding structural change, provides a blueprint for effective advocacy against institutional racism.